The knock came at 11:47 p.m., violent enough to rattle the hinges. Adrian Hayes froze halfway up the stairs, his daughter's bedtime story still warm on his lips. Through the rain-streaked window, he saw her, Victoria Sinclair, the billionaire recluse from across the street, drenched and shaking like a woman who'd finally run out of places to hide. She clutched something against her chest. A blanket. Baby-sized. And when their eyes met through the glass, Adrian saw a desperation that terrified him more than any stranger's anger ever could. Because he recognized it. He'd worn that same look the night his wife walked out. This is their story. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey takes us. The October rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the quiet Oregon neighborhood into a watercolor painting of grays and darker grays. Adrian Hayes stood at his kitchen sink, watching water cascade off the gutters, while his hands moved through the familiar ritual of washing Sophie's dinosaur print cereal bowl. 6 years old, and she still insisted on the same bowl every morning. He'd learned not to fight those battles. "Daddy, can I have screen time?" Sophie's voice carried from the living room, that particular pitch she used when she already knew the answer but figured asking couldn't hurt. "Did you finish your reading worksheet?" Silence. The kind that answered everything. Adrian dried his hands and walked into the living room where Sophie sat cross-legged on the carpet, her reading worksheet conspicuously blank beside her. She looked up at him with those enormous brown eyes, her mother's eyes, though he tried not to think about that, and gave him a smile that had probably worked on every adult she'd ever met. "I was going to do it after." "Uh-huh." Adrian crouched down beside her, picking up the worksheet. Simple 3-letter words. Cat, dog, son. "How about we make a deal? You read these to me, and then you get 30 minutes before dinner." 45? He fought back a smile. 35, and that's my final offer. "Deal." She grabbed the worksheet with sudden enthusiasm, as if reading had been her idea all along. This was Adrian's life now. Negotiations over screen time, dinosaur bowls, the careful architecture of routine that kept everything from falling apart. At 32, he'd become an expert at small, manageable moments. Nothing unexpected. Nothing that could shatter the fragile world he'd built around his daughter. 4 years ago, when Rebecca left, she'd done it cleanly. No dramatic fight, no tearful goodbye. Just a note on the kitchen counter explaining that she'd never wanted to be a mother, that she'd tried to love their life together but couldn't breathe inside it anymore. She'd walked out when Sophie was 2, young enough that she barely remembered having a mother at all. Adrian had spent the first year angry, the second year numb. By the third year, he'd accepted that some people just aren't built for the kind of love that stays. He'd filed for divorce, won full custody without a fight, Rebecca hadn't even shown up to the hearing, and rebuilt his life into something stable, predictable, safe. He ran a small appliance repair business from his garage, fixing washing machines and refrigerators for people who couldn't afford to replace them. The work was honest, if not exactly lucrative, but it let him set his own hours, be there when Sophie got off the school bus, make it to every parent-teacher conference and soccer practice. They lived in a small 2-bedroom house on a street where neighbors still waved and kids still played in yards. Not fancy, but theirs. The mortgage was manageable. The roof didn't leak. Sophie had her own room decorated with glow-in-the-dark stars she'd carefully positioned according to a constellation app he'd downloaded. It wasn't the life he'd imagined at 25, but it was enough, or at least he'd convinced himself it was. "S-U-N, son!" Sophie looked up at him triumphantly. "Perfect. Keep going." The rain picked up outside, drumming harder against the windows. Adrian glanced across the street, out of habit, toward the house that had puzzled the entire neighborhood for the past 3 years. Victoria Sinclair's house looked exactly like his. Same basic ranch-style construction, same modest square footage, except everyone knew the woman who lived there was worth more than everyone else on the block combined. Billionaire tech CEO, according to the one neighbor who'd bothered to Google her. She'd made headlines years ago, something about artificial intelligence and a buyout that had made her obscenely wealthy before she'd even turned 30. Then she'd vanished from public life completely. Now she lived across the street from a single dad who fixed refrigerators, in a house she could have bought 1,000 times over, and no one knew why. Adrian had spoken to her maybe a dozen times in 3 years. Brief exchanges when they collected mail at the same time. A polite wave when their paths crossed during his morning runs. She was beautiful in that untouchable way some women are. Dark hair always perfect, clothes always expensive despite their simplicity. A face that looked like it had been designed by someone who understood symmetry. But it was her eyes that stuck with him, sad in a way that felt permanent, like grief had moved in and changed the locks. "I'm done." Sophie thrust the worksheet at him. All of them, Adrian checked. She'd read 12 words, which meant she'd technically completed the assignment, even if her handwriting looked like a seismograph during an earthquake. "Excellent work. 35 minutes, starting now." Sophie scrambled for the tablet while Adrian headed back to the kitchen to start dinner. Thursday meant spaghetti. Friday would be tacos. Saturday, homemade pizza. The routine rolled forward like a machine he'd built and now couldn't stop. He was browning ground beef when headlights swept across his kitchen window. He glanced out and saw Victoria's black SUV pulling into her driveway, expensive and silent. She climbed out wearing what looked like a business suit, though where she went during the day remained a mystery. She paused before going inside, looking up at the rain like she was gathering courage for something. Their eyes met across the distance. Adrian raised a hand in greeting. Victoria's response was delayed, almost reluctant, but she waved back before disappearing into her house. He stirred the meat, added sauce, moved through the familiar steps without thinking. Dinner, bath time, 2 chapters of the book they were reading together. Currently some fantasy thing about dragons and a girl who could talk to them. Sophie's eyes were drooping by the end of chapter 2. "One more?" she mumbled. "Nice try." "Teeth brushed?" "Yes." "Really?" She sighed dramatically. "I'll go do it." He waited in her doorway while she shuffled to the bathroom, listening to the water run for exactly the amount of time it took to not actually brush your teeth. He let it go. Pick your battles. When she climbed into bed, Adrian tucked the blanket around her, smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart?" "Why doesn't the lady across the street have any kids?" The question caught him off guard. "I don't know. Not everyone does." "Is she sad?" Adrian thought about those eyes. "Maybe. Sometimes people are sad about things we can't see. Like when Mom left?" His chest tightened. Sophie rarely mentioned her mother. When she did, it always felt like stepping on glass. "Yeah, like that." "Do you think she's lonely?" "I don't know, Soph. Probably. But that's not something we need to worry about. Okay? You just focus on being 6 and terrible at brushing your teeth." She giggled, which had been the goal. "I did too brush them." "Uh-huh. Good night, troublemaker." "Good night, Daddy." He left her door cracked open. She didn't like complete darkness, and headed downstairs. The house felt bigger at night, emptier. He cleaned up the kitchen, folded the laundry he'd forgotten about that morning, checked his email for any new repair jobs. Outside, the rain continued its assault on the world. Adrian was halfway through a documentary about deep-sea creatures when the knock came. At first, he thought he'd imagined it. It was nearly midnight, and the rain was loud enough to create auditory illusions. But then it came again, harder, urgent. He muted the television and listened. Another knock, this one almost desperate. Adrian moved to the window beside the front door and pulled back the curtain. Victoria Sinclair stood on his porch, soaked completely through despite the roof overhang, shaking like the temperature was 20 degrees colder than it actually was. Her hair hung in wet ropes around her face. Her expensive clothes were plastered to her body, and she was clutching something against her chest. A blanket, faded and small, the kind you'd wrap around a baby. Their eyes met through the glass, and Adrian saw something that made his stomach drop. Raw, unfiltered desperation. He unlocked the door and pulled it open. "Victoria, what?" "I'm sorry." Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying for hours. "I'm so sorry. I know it's late. She stopped, her whole body trembling. "I didn't know where else to go." Adrian glanced back toward the stairs, making sure Sophie's door was still closed. "Come inside. You're freezing." She shook her head violently, but, "No, I can't. I just need—" Her voice broke completely. "I need to ask you something, and I know how insane it's going to sound, but I'm out of options, and I've been watching you with your daughter for 3 years, and you're the only person I trust, and—" "Hey." Adrian kept his voice low, calm. "Take a breath. Whatever it is, just tell me. Tell." Victoria's eyes filled with tears that immediately spilled over, mixing with the rain on her face. She looked down at the blanket in her hands, her fingers white-knuckled around the fabric. 5 years ago," she whispered, I had everything. A husband who loved me. A daughter who was perfect. We were happy. She finally looked up at him. Do you know what drunk drivers take from people, Adrian? Not just lives. They take futures. They take every single moment you thought you'd have. Adrian's throat went dry. Victoria. My daughter was 3. Her name was Emma. She had this blanket, wouldn't sleep without it. Victoria held it up, and Adrian could see Winnie the Pooh characters faded nearly to ghosts. We were driving home from her grandmother's house. Some guy ran a red light going 60 in a 35 zone. Blood alcohol, 3 times the legal limit. Her voice had gone flat, mechanical. My husband died on impact. Emma died in the ambulance. I had a concussion and a broken collarbone. I remember waking up in the hospital and the first thing I asked was whether they'd found Emma's blanket in the wreckage. Isn't that insane? My family was dead and I was worried about a blanket. Kim. Jesus. Adrian didn't know what else to say. His mind was reeling. I threw myself into work after that. Built an empire. Made more money than I could ever spend. Bought houses I'll never live in. None of it matters. She stepped closer and Adrian could smell rain and something floral, perfume that hadn't quite washed away. I'm 30 years old and completely alone. I've tried therapy. I've tried dating. I've tried everything. But the only thing I actually want, the only thing that might make any of this bearable, is to be a mother again. Adrian's heart was pounding. There are agencies, adoption, surrogacy. You have resources. I don't want resources. Victoria's voice turned sharp. I don't want some anonymous donor and a clinical procedure in a sterile office. I don't want to raise a child alone, wondering if I'm going to screw them up because I'm too broken to do it right. She took a shaking breath. I've watched you with Sophie for 3 years. The way you are with her. Patient, kind, present. You're exactly the kind of father my daughter should have had. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Adrian gripped the door frame. What are you asking me? Victoria met his eyes directly. Help me have a child. The words hung in the rain-soaked air between them. Adrian's mind went blank. Then it filled with 1,000 thoughts at once, crashing into each other. This was insane. This woman, this stranger basically, was standing on his porch asking him to, no. The word came out harder than he intended. No, absolutely not. That's, Victoria, you need to go home, get some sleep, talk to someone. But this isn't, I can't. I know how it sounds. She didn't move. I know, but I've thought about this for months. I've considered every option, and I keep coming back to this. To you. You don't even know me. I know you raise your daughter alone. I know you work from home so you never miss her getting off the bus. I know you read to her every night and you make her pancakes shaped like animals on Saturday mornings. I know you haven't dated anyone in 4 years because you won't bring strangers into her life. Victoria's voice cracked. I know you're a good man, Adrian, maybe the only good man I've ever met, and I'm desperate enough to stand in the rain and beg. Adrian felt like his chest was caving in. I have a daughter upstairs who's my entire world. I can't risk. I'm not asking you to risk anything with Sophie. I'm asking you to help me create a life. That's all. I'll handle everything else. Legally, financially, whatever you need to feel safe. She pressed the blanket against her chest like it could protect her heart. I just can't keep living in this emptiness. I need something to wake up for besides money and work, and this house that's too quiet to breathe in. This is insane, Adrian said, but his voice had lost its edge. I know. You're asking me to, I don't even know what you're asking me to do. Help me be a mother again, that's all. However that looks, whatever that means, I just need help. Tears were streaming down her face now. Please, I wouldn't ask if I had anyone else. The rain poured harder, drowning out everything but her breathing and his. Adrian thought about Sophie's question earlier. Is she lonely? He thought about the look in Victoria's eyes every time she'd watched Sophie playing in the yard, that flash of pain she could never quite hide. He thought about his own loneliness, the one he'd gotten so good at ignoring that he'd almost convinced himself it wasn't there. I can't answer this right now, he said quietly. This is too big. Victoria nodded slowly, wiping at her face even though the rain just replaced the tears. I understand. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. She turned to leave. Wait. She stopped. Are you going to be okay? Tonight, I mean. Victoria looked back at him, and for just a second, her careful mask slipped completely. He saw the full weight of her grief, naked and terrible. Honestly, I stopped being okay 5 years ago, but I'll survive tonight. I'm good at surviving. She walked back across the street through the rain, still clutching that blanket. Adrian stood in his doorway and watched her go inside, watched the lights in her house come on, one by one. He closed his door and locked it, but he didn't move away. His hands were shaking, his mind was racing. Help me have a child. The request was impossible, absurd, the kind of thing that could destroy everything he'd spent 4 years building. But as he climbed the stairs and checked on Sophie, still sleeping peacefully, her nightlight casting stars across the ceiling, Adrian realized something that terrified him. He was actually considering it, not because Victoria was beautiful or wealthy, not even because her story had broken something inside him, but because her question had forced him to ask one of his own. When had he stopped living and started just surviving? He stood in Sophie's doorway for a long time, watching his daughter breathe, trying to find an answer that made sense. The rain fell. Across the street, Victoria's light stayed on until dawn. The morning came gray and cold. Adrian hadn't slept. He'd spent the night alternating between telling himself to forget the entire encounter and replaying every word Victoria had said. I'm desperate enough to stand in the rain and beg. He made pancakes for Sophie, regular circles, not animals, because he couldn't focus enough for shapes, and tried to act normal while his daughter chattered about a dream she'd had involving talking cats and a castle made of cheese. Daddy, you're not listening. Adrian snapped back to attention. Sorry, sweetheart. The cheese castle. Keep going. Sophie studied him with the unsettling perception 6-year-olds sometimes have. Are you sad? No, just tired. Didn't sleep great. Because of the rain? Yeah, because of the rain. After he dropped Sophie at school, Adrian sat in his truck in the parking lot and stared at his phone. He'd found Victoria's number in the neighborhood directory. Everyone's contact information was listed for emergencies, not that anyone had ever used it. His thumb hovered over her name. This was crazy. He should delete the number, go home, fix the 3 washing machines waiting in his garage, pretend last night never happened. But Sophie's voice echoed in his head. Why doesn't the lady across the street have any kids? And underneath that, his own thought, the one that had kept him awake. When did you stop living? Adrian pressed dial before he could stop himself. She answered on the first ring. Adrian? Her voice was rough, exhausted. Did you sleep? No. Yeah, me neither. He rubbed his face. Look, I'm not saying yes. I'm not even saying maybe. But I think we should talk. Actually talk. Not in the rain at midnight with emotions running that high. Silence on the other end. Then, okay. Are you free this afternoon? After I pick up Sophie from school, my sister usually watches her for a few hours on Thursdays. We could meet somewhere, get coffee, have a conversation like normal human beings. Normal human beings don't have this conversation. Despite everything, Adrian almost smiled. Fair point. But we can try. There's a cafe on 4th Street. Quiet. I can be there at 3. I'll be there. He hung up before he could change his mind. The cafe was exactly as Victoria had described. Quiet, nearly empty, the kind of place that served expensive coffee to people who needed somewhere to hide for a while. Adrian arrived first and claimed a corner table, ordering black coffee he didn't actually want just to have something to do with his hands. Victoria walked in at 3:02, and Adrian barely recognized her. She wore jeans and a simple sweater. No makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She looked younger, more vulnerable, and somehow more real than the put-together woman he'd seen around the neighborhood. She sat down across from him without ordering anything. Thank you for coming, she said. I'm still not sure why I did. Because you're curious. Or because you're kind. Maybe both. She folded her hands on the table. I owe you an apology. Last night was unfair. I ambushed you with something impossible and expected an answer. You were hurting. That's not an excuse. She finally met his eyes. I've spent 5 years trying to figure out how to keep living in a world that took everything from me. Some days are better than others. Last night was bad. I saw you putting Sophie to bed through your window, and it just broke me. I wasn't thinking clearly. Adrian took a sip of too hot coffee, buying time. Tell me about them, your husband and daughter. Victoria's expression shifted, surprise flickering across her face. Why? Because if we're going to have this insane conversation, I need to understand who you are. And you defined yourself by losing them, so tell me about them. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, his name was Michael. We met in college. He was studying architecture. I was in computer science. He used to joke that he designed spaces for people to live in, and I designed spaces that didn't exist at all. A sad smile touched her lips. He was patient, steady, everything I wasn't. When my company took off, he never resented it. He just supported me, made sure I ate when I forgot, reminded me why the work mattered. And Emma? Victoria's voice softened. She looked exactly like him. Same smile, same way of tilting her head when she was thinking. She was so smart, Adrian. 3 years old and she could carry on conversations that made adults laugh. She loved books. We'd read for hours. She touched the edge of the table. The night of the accident, we'd been reading Winnie the Pooh at my mother's house. Emma fell asleep with the blanket, and I was carrying her to the car when she woke up just enough to say, "More story, Mama." Those were the last words I ever heard her say. Adrian's throat was tight. "I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. It doesn't change anything." She looked out the window. After they died, I threw myself into work because it was the only thing I could control. I made obscene amounts of money. Bought that house in your neighborhood because it was small and normal, and the opposite of the mansion where I'd lived with them. I thought maybe if I stripped everything away, I could figure out how to breathe again. She turned back to him. It didn't work. The house is still too big, too quiet, and no amount of money fills the space where a child's laughter should be. Adrian studied her face, seeing the truth there. You really have thought about this. This isn't some impulse. I've thought about nothing else for months. I looked into adoption. The wait lists are years long, and my mental health history complicates things. I considered using a sperm bank, but the idea of raising a child completely alone terrifies me. I'm not stable enough for that. She struggled for words. I need someone who actually cares whether the child exists. Not a donor number, a person. Why me specifically? There are agencies for this kind of thing. Because I've watched you. She held up a hand before he could respond. Not in a creepy way, but we live across the street from each other. I see how you are with Sophie. The patience you have, even when she's difficult. The way you show up for every small thing. Most fathers would have crumbled trying to raise a daughter alone. You made it look like the only thing that mattered. Adrian shook his head. You're seeing the good moments? You're not seeing the times I've lost my temper over nothing. The days I've fed her cereal for dinner because I was too tired to cook. The fact that I'm so scared of screwing her up that I barely let her take risks. That makes you human, not a bad father. It makes me flawed. And what you're asking for isn't something flawed people should do. Who else should do it then? Perfect people? Victoria's voice took on an edge. They don't exist, Adrian. We're all just trying to survive our damage and hoping we don't pass too much of it on. At least you're aware of your flaws. At least you're trying. The conversation paused while a barista cleared a nearby table. When they were alone again, Adrian leaned forward. Walk me through what you're actually proposing. Logistics, expectations, all of it. Victoria straightened slightly, and he saw her shift into what must be her business mode. Clear, precise, prepared. I've consulted with lawyers. We would create a comprehensive legal agreement covering parental rights, financial responsibilities, custody arrangements. You would have no financial obligation unless you chose otherwise. Custody could be joint, or I could be primary parent with your involvement as much or as little as you wanted. And Sophie? She would know the child is her biological sibling if and when you decided to tell her. But there would be no expectation of our families merging. You could maintain complete separation if that's what you needed. This is insane, Adrian said again, but there was less conviction in it now. Yes. You're asking me to father a child with essentially a stranger. Yes. And you think that's better than a sperm bank? Victoria's composure cracked slightly. I think it's the only option I can live with. I need to know the person. I need to know they'd care if something happened to me. That they'd care about the child existing in the world, not just because of legal obligation, but because it mattered to them. She met his eyes. I can't do this alone, Adrian. I know myself well enough to know that. I need someone who's invested, even if it's complicated. Adrian sat back, his coffee long since gone cold. His mind was spinning with 1,000 objections and just as many possibilities. I need time, he said finally. This isn't a decision I can make over coffee. How much time? I don't know. Weeks? Maybe months? This affects Sophie's entire life, not just mine. Victoria nodded slowly. I understand. But Adrian? She waited until he looked at her. Don't take too long. I'm 30 years old. I've already lost 5 years to grief. I don't have forever. They stood together, the conversation ending in awkward silence. As Victoria turned to leave, Adrian heard himself say, for what it's worth, I don't think you're crazy. Desperate, yes, but not crazy. She glanced back, something like gratitude in her eyes. That might be the kindest thing anyone said to me in 5 years. Then she was gone, leaving Adrian alone with a cold coffee and a choice that could change everything. Sad. He picked up Sophie from his sister's house and drove home in silence while she sang along to songs on the radio. When they pulled into the driveway, Sophie pointed across the street. The sad lady's home. Adrian looked. Victoria's car was in the driveway, but he couldn't see her through the windows. Yeah, she is. Can we bring her cookies? You always say cookies make people feel better. Out of the mouths of 6-year-olds. Maybe this weekend, okay? Okay. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Adrian sat on his porch despite the cold. Across the street, he could see Victoria moving past her windows. Living room to kitchen to bedroom. The lights going off one by one as she prepared for another night alone in a too-quiet house. He thought about her question, about his own loneliness, the kind he'd been ignoring for so long he'd almost forgotten it was there. He thought about Sophie growing up, watching him shrink his world down to something manageable and safe. What was he teaching her about life, about taking chances? His phone buzzed, a text from his sister Rachel. What's going on? You seemed weird when you picked up Sophie. Adrian stared at the message for a long time before typing. If I told you, you'd think I'd lost my mind. Her response was immediate. Try me. So he did. He called her and told her everything. Victoria's knock in the rain, the cafe conversation, the impossible question. Rachel was silent for so long, Adrian thought the call had dropped. Rachel? I'm here. I'm just processing. A pause. Okay, this is absolutely insane. I know. But I also think you should consider it. Adrian nearly dropped the phone. What? Hear me out. When Rebecca left, you built this fortress around yourself and Sophie, safe and controlled and completely isolated. You haven't dated. You barely see friends. You've turned your entire life into routine because you're terrified of anything that could hurt Sophie. Rachel's voice softened. But Adrian, you're also terrified of anything that could hurt you, and that's no way to live. This isn't about me living. This is about a woman asking me to help her have a child. Is she asking you to raise it with her? No, she's offering me as much or as little involvement as I want. So, worst case scenario, you help someone who's suffering create something beautiful and you walk away. Best case scenario, you help someone and find something you didn't know you needed. Adrian rubbed his eyes. You're supposed to talk me out of this. Why? Because it's unconventional? Because it's scary? Adrian, you've been dying slowly for 4 years. I've watched it happen. Maybe this woman showing up in the rain is exactly the kind of crazy you need. After they hung up, Adrian sat in the darkness for a long time. Across the street, Victoria's lights were all off now. He thought about a 3-year-old girl named Emma, who'd asked for one more story. He thought about Sophie, growing up watching him hide from life. He thought about the desperation in Victoria's eyes when she'd said, I just need something to wake up for. And somewhere between the darkness and the cold, Adrian realized Rachel was right. He'd been dying slowly. Maybe it was time to try living dangerously instead. 3 weeks passed before Adrian texted Victoria again. 3 weeks of going through motions, of lying awake at night arguing with himself, of watching Sophie play and wondering what the hell he was even considering. The text he finally sent was simple. Can we talk again? Her response came within minutes. When? They met at the same cafe on a Wednesday afternoon. This time, Victoria looked more like the woman he'd seen around the neighborhood, composed, carefully put together, her armor back in place, but her hands shook slightly when she wrapped them around her coffee cup. "I've been thinking about what you said," Adrian started, then stopped. "Actually, that's a lie. I haven't been able to think about anything else. And I have about 1,000 questions, starting with the most basic one. Why does this have to be so complicated? Why not just find a sperm donor and do this the normal way?" Victoria stared into her coffee. "Because I'm terrified of doing this alone. Not just practically, but emotionally. After Emma died, I couldn't even look at children for 2 years. I'd cross the street to avoid playgrounds. The sound of a baby crying would send me into panic attacks." She finally looked up. "I'm better now, mostly. But the idea of being solely responsible for another life with no one who actually cares whether I succeed or fail, that terrifies me more than staying alone forever." "So you want backup?" "I want someone who gives a damn, even if it's from across the street." She set down her cup. "Look, I know this is asking a lot. I know it's weird and complicated and probably a terrible idea, but I've run every scenario. I've consulted therapists, lawyers, financial advisors. This is the only path that doesn't end with me either backing out completely or having a breakdown trying to do it alone." Adrian leaned back in his chair. "What happens if I say yes and then change my mind halfway through? What if you get pregnant and I panic? Then the legal agreement protects both of us. You walk away and I continue as a single parent. No child support obligation, no custody battle, clean separation. And if I want to be involved?" Something shifted in Victoria's expression. "Hope? Maybe? Or fear? Then we figure it out as we go. I'm not looking for a co-parent in the traditional sense. I'm not asking you to move in or merge our families or play house. But if you wanted to be part of the child's life, I wouldn't stop you." "This is insane," Adrian muttered, but the words had become almost reflexive now, a mantra he repeated without conviction. "You keep saying that." "Because it keeps being true." Victoria smiled slightly, the first real smile he'd seen from her. "Fair enough." They sat in silence for a moment, the cafe's ambient noise filling the space between them. "Tell me about Sophie's mother," Victoria said suddenly. Adrian's jaw tightened. "Why?" "Because you're asking me to trust you with something huge. I should know what I'm getting into, too." He wanted to deflect, to say it wasn't relevant, but she was right. If they were going to do this, and some part of him was starting to accept that they might actually do this, they needed to know each other beyond the surface. "Her name's Rebecca. We met in college, got married too young, because that's what you did when you were 22 and thought you knew everything." Adrian stared at the table. "She got pregnant with Sophie by accident. I was excited, terrified, but excited. Rebecca was just terrified. She tried. I'll give her that. But she hated every minute of motherhood, hated the loss of freedom, hated the constant needs, hated feeling trapped." "When did she leave?" "Sophie was 2, just walked out one day, left a note saying she couldn't breathe, couldn't be the person we needed her to be, filed for divorce, signed away custody, and disappeared. I haven't heard from her in 4 years." Victoria's expression softened. That must have been devastating. It was clarifying. Adrian met her eyes. "I learned that some people just aren't built for permanence. And I learned that I'd rather raise Sophie alone than raise her with someone who resents her existence." "Is that what you're worried about? That I'll resent the child?" "I'm worried about a lot of things. But no, not that. If anything, I'm worried you'll love the child too much. That you'll try to recreate what you lost and end up disappointed when reality doesn't match your grief." The words came out harsher than he'd intended, but Victoria didn't flinch. "That's a fair concern," she said quietly. "I've thought about it too. My therapist warned me about replacement syndrome, trying to fill the Emma-shaped hole with another child. But here's the thing, Adrian. I'm not trying to replace her. I'm trying to survive losing her. And the only way I know how to do that is to have something to live for besides work and money and this emptiness. What if it doesn't help? What if you have another child and you're still just as broken? Then at least I'll have tried. At least I'll have given life to something instead of just existing in the aftermath of death." She paused. "And maybe I'll still be broken. Probably I will be. But I'd rather be broken while raising a child who's loved than broken and alone in a quiet house." Adrian couldn't argue with that logic, even if it terrified him. "I need to talk to Sophie," he said finally. "Not about the specifics, but about the idea that things might change. that our family might expand. How do you think she'll react? Honestly, she'll probably be excited. She's been asking for a sibling for years. I just never thought. He stopped. I never thought I'd consider it. Victoria reached across the table and did something unexpected. She placed her hand over his, just for a moment. Thank you for not running away screaming. The night's still young. She laughed, and the sound was so unexpected, so genuine, that Adrian found himself smiling too. When they left the cafe, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. They stood awkwardly in the parking lot, neither quite knowing how to end the conversation. I'll talk to Sophie this week, Adrian said, and my sister, and probably a lawyer of my own because I'm not signing anything without understanding it completely. That's smart. You should protect yourself. I'm not trying to protect myself from you. I'm trying to protect Sophie. There's a difference. Victoria nodded. I understand. Take whatever time you need. Just... She hesitated. Don't take so long that you talk yourself out of something you actually want to do. How do you know what I want to do? Because you're still here. If you'd really wanted to say no, you would have done it 3 weeks ago. She was right, and they both knew it. Adrian drove home with his mind racing, pulled into his driveway, and sat in the truck for 10 minutes, just trying to breathe. Across the street, Victoria's house was dark. She hadn't gotten home yet. Inside, Rachel was making dinner while Sophie set the table. They did this every Wednesday. Rachel came over, cooked something that wasn't spaghetti or tacos, and gave Adrian a break from the routine. How'd it go? Rachel asked quietly while Sophie was in the bathroom. I think I'm actually going to do this. Rachel stopped stirring whatever was on the stove. Really? I think so. Maybe. I don't know. Adrian sank into a chair. Tell me I'm not crazy? You're definitely crazy, but sometimes crazy is good. Sophie bounded back into the kitchen. What's crazy? Your dad's cooking, Rachel said smoothly. We were just saying he's crazy for thinking his spaghetti is better than my lasagna. Aunt Rachel's lasagna is way better, Sophie announced. And just like that, the moment of tension passed. After dinner, after Rachel left, after Sophie's bath and the nightly reading ritual, Adrian sat on the edge of her bed and tried to figure out how to broach the subject. Soph, can I ask you something? She looked up from the stuffed bear she was arranging just so. Okay. How would you feel if things changed around here? If our family got bigger? Sophie's eyes went wide. Are you getting married? What? No, why would you think that? Because that's what happens in movies. The dad meets someone and they get married and then there's a baby. Adrian had to suppress a laugh at the 6-year-old logic. No, I'm not getting married, but I've been talking to someone about maybe helping them have a baby. And if that happened, you'd have a brother or sister. Sort of. Like a half-brother or sister? Exactly like that. Sophie thought about this for approximately 3 seconds before breaking into a huge grin. Can it be a sister? I want a sister. I can't promise that, kiddo. Babies come however they come. Would she live here? No, she'd live with her mom, but you'd get to know her, see her sometimes. Would her mom be nice? Adrian thought about Victoria standing in the rain, clutching a dead child's blanket. Yeah, I think she'd be very nice. She's sad right now, but she's nice. Then I think it's a good idea. Sophie said it with such simple certainty that Adrian felt something in his chest crack open. Everyone should have kids if they want them. That's what you always say. He did say that. He'd said it when Sophie asked why some kids at school had 2 moms or 2 dads or lived with grandparents. Everyone deserves love and family, whatever that looks like. You're pretty smart, you know that? Sophie beamed. I know. Adrian kissed her forehead and turned off the light, leaving the door cracked. He stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to her settle into sleep. His daughter had just given permission for something she didn't fully understand. But then again, neither did he. The next morning, Adrian called the lawyer Victoria had recommended. The woman's name was Patricia Chen, and she specialized in what she called non-traditional family arrangements. I've worked with Victoria on the preliminary documents, Patricia explained over the phone. But you absolutely need your own representation. No offense to her, but your interests and hers aren't identical. What exactly am I signing up for? That depends entirely on what you want. The basic framework establishes paternity, outlines parental rights and responsibilities, addresses financial obligations, and creates custody guidelines, but it's customizable. Some clients want complete separation. Others want joint custody from day one. There's no standard template for this. Adrian made an appointment for later that week. Then he spent 2 hours researching family law, reading articles about sperm donors and parental rights, falling down internet rabbit holes about custody battles and child support. The more he read, the more complicated it became. By the time Thursday rolled around, Adrian had compiled a list of questions that filled 3 notebook pages. He met Victoria at her house this time. She'd suggested it, saying they needed privacy for the conversation they were about to have. Her house was exactly what he'd expected, and nothing like it at the same time. Expensive furniture, but comfortable. Art on the walls that looked original. A kitchen that was clearly professional grade but showed signs of actual use. And everywhere, in frames on shelves and tables, photos of a man and a little girl. Victoria caught him looking. That's Michael and Emma. I can't put them away. Don't want to, actually. You shouldn't have to. She led him to the living room and they sat on opposite ends of a couch that probably cost more than his truck. I talked to a lawyer, Adrian said. My own lawyer. Good. What did she say? That we need to define expectations before we do anything else. So that's what I want to do. I want to lay everything out. No assumptions, no hoping we'll figure it out later. Clear expectations. Victoria pulled out her own notebook. I've been making lists too. They spent the next 3 hours talking through scenarios. What happens if Victoria meets someone and wants to get married? Does the new spouse have any parental rights? What if Adrian wants to be involved but then can't handle it emotionally? What about holidays, school decisions, medical emergencies? This is exhausting, Adrian said around hour 2. This is necessary, Victoria countered. I don't want either of us going into this blind. By the time they finished, they had the skeleton of an agreement. Victoria would be the primary parent. Adrian would have the option of involvement at whatever level he chose, with the understanding that he could adjust that over time. No child support obligation unless he wanted shared custody. Medical decisions would be Victoria's unless it was life-threatening, in which case they'd both have input. What about telling the child? Adrian asked. About me. Victoria set down her pen. I think honesty from the beginning. Age-appropriate, but honest. No secrets, no lies. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. And Sophie? She'd know she has a sibling. How much contact they have would be up to you. Adrian stared at his notes, at the pages and pages of contingencies and clauses. This doesn't feel real yet. It won't until it happens. If it happens. You keep saying if. Are you having second thoughts? Victoria was quiet for a moment. Every day. But not because I don't want this. Because I'm terrified of wanting it too much and having it fall apart. I've learned that the things you want most are usually the things that destroy you. That's bleak. That's experience. Adrian stood, needing to move. He walked to the window and looked across the street at his own house. So close. So separate. If we do this, we're connected forever. You understand that, right? Even if I choose minimal involvement, even if we barely see each other, there will always be a child who ties us together. I know. And that doesn't scare you? It terrifies me. But being alone terrifies me more. He turned back to face her. I need 1 more week. 1 more week to sit with this, to make sure I'm not just getting swept up in something because it feels like the right thing to do. Take 2 weeks. Take a month. I'd rather you be sure than rush into something you'll regret. They stood there in her expensive living room, 2 damaged people trying to build something impossible out of shared loneliness and desperate hope. Can I ask you something personal? Adrian said. More personal than asking me to father your child? He almost smiled. Fair point. But yeah, why haven't you dated? You're smart, successful, beautiful. You could have anyone. Victoria looked down. I tried. About a year ago, I made myself go on dates, met a few men, nice guys mostly, successful. One of them was really persistent, kept asking me out. We dated for 3 months. What happened? He didn't understand why I still had pictures of Michael and Emma everywhere. Suggested I move on by putting them in an album instead of keeping them on display. Said it was unhealthy to live in the past. Her voice hardened. I ended it that night. Because anyone who thinks loving dead people is unhealthy doesn't understand love at all. Adrian crossed back to the couch and sat down, closer this time. For what it's worth, I don't think it's unhealthy. I think it's human. Thank you. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. I should go, Adrian said finally. Sophie will be home soon? Victoria walked him to the door. As he stepped onto the porch, she called his name. Yeah? Whatever you decide, I want you to know I'm grateful for considering this, for not treating me like I'm crazy, for actually seeing me instead of just seeing the money or the tragedy. You're welcome. He walked across the street, feeling her eyes on his back the whole way. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Adrian pulled out his phone and opened a note he'd been writing for weeks. A pros and cons list, like that would somehow make this decision mathematical. Pros. Help someone who's suffering. Give Sophie a sibling. Maybe find something he didn't know he needed. Cons. Complicate his life enormously. Risk Sophie's stability. Tie himself to a woman he barely knew. The list was useless. This wasn't a decision that could be made with logic. Adrian deleted the note and called Rachel instead. It's late, she answered. This must be important. I'm going to say yes. Silence. Then, are you sure? No, but I don't think I'll ever be sure, and if I wait for certainty, I'll wait forever. What changed your mind? Adrian thought about Victoria's house full of photos, about her admission that she'd tried to date and couldn't, about the way she'd said loving dead people like it was the most natural thing in the world. I think she needs this more than I need safety, he said quietly. And maybe Sophie needs to see me take a risk. Maybe I need to see me take a risk. When are you going to tell her? Tomorrow, before I can change my mind. Adrian? Yeah? I'm proud of you. Terrified for you, but proud of you. That makes two of us. He hung up and sat in the darkness for a long time, thinking about the morning, about the words he'd have to say, about the door he was about to walk through that would never close behind him. Across the street, one light was still on in Victoria's house. He wondered if she was awake too, wondering what he'd decide, wondering if this crazy plan would actually happen or if she'd wake up alone again tomorrow. Adrian pulled out his phone and typed a message before he could overthink it. I'm in. Let's do this. He hit send and watched the text deliver, watched the little indicator that showed Victoria was typing, watched it appear and disappear 3 times before her response finally came through. Are you sure? He typed back immediately. No, but I'm doing it anyway. Her next message took longer. When it came, it was just 2 words. Thank you. Adrian set down his phone and stared at the ceiling, his heart pounding, wondering what the hell he'd just agreed to. Tomorrow, they'd start the process. Lawyers and doctors and agreements. But tonight, for just a few more hours, he could pretend his life was still simple. The light across the street went off. Adrian closed his eyes and tried to sleep, knowing he wouldn't. The next morning came too fast and too slow at the same time. Adrian made pancakes on autopilot, kissed Sophie goodbye at the bus stop, and walked back to his house with lead feet. Victoria was waiting on her porch. You weren't kidding, she said when he approached. I don't kid about life-changing decisions at midnight. Want to come in? We should probably talk logistics. Inside, Victoria had coffee waiting and a folder of documents on the table. She'd clearly been up for hours. I called Patricia this morning, she said. Told her we're moving forward. She'll coordinate with your lawyer to finalize the agreement. How long will that take? Couple weeks, maybe. They'll want to make sure everything's airtight. Victoria poured coffee with steady hands, but Adrian noticed she'd chewed her thumbnail down to nothing. In the meantime, we should probably talk about the medical side. I've already chosen a clinic. Very discreet, very professional. They specialize in non-traditional arrangements. Adrian sat down heavily. This is really happening. Having second thoughts already? Third and fourth thoughts. But no, I'm not backing out. He met her eyes. Are you? I've wanted this for too long to back out now. They spent the next hour going over details that felt both clinical and intimate. Testing schedules, success rates. What happens if it doesn't work the first time, or the second, or the 5th? The doctor said it could take several attempts, Victoria explained, her voice carefully neutral. Especially given my age and stress levels. We need to be prepared for this to take time. How much time? Months, maybe longer. Adrian absorbed that. Months of this strange limbo, of being connected to Victoria in this bizarre way while trying to maintain normal life with Sophie. One day at a time, he said, more to himself than to her. "One day at a time," Victoria agreed. Over the next 2 weeks, they signed more documents than Adrian had signed in his entire life. His lawyer went through everything with excruciating detail, making sure he understood exactly what he was agreeing to. "This is unconventional," Patricia had said during one meeting where both lawyers and both clients sat around a conference table. "But it's not unprecedented. As long as everyone's clear on expectations and everything's documented, it's legally sound." The day they signed the final agreement, Adrian's hand shook so badly he could barely hold the pen. "Last chance," Victoria said quietly, while the lawyers were making copies. "If you want out, now's the time." "Do you want me to want out?" "I want you to be certain." "I'm not, but I'm doing it anyway." She smiled, sad and grateful and terrified all at once. "Okay then." The first medical appointment was awkward in ways Adrian hadn't anticipated. Clinical, yes, but also strangely intimate. The doctor was professional and matter-of-fact, which helped, but there was no getting around the weirdness of the situation. Afterward, sitting in his truck in the clinic parking lot, Adrian called Rachel. "How was it?" "Weird, really weird, but done." "How's Victoria handling it?" "Better than me, I think. She's done this before, had a kid before. I'm just the guy who—" He stopped. "This is so strange." "You're allowed to feel strange. You're doing a strange thing." "Thanks for the reassurance." "Anytime." The waiting began. 2 weeks until they'd know if it worked. 2 weeks of trying to act normal while his brain screamed that nothing would ever be normal again. He threw himself into work, fixing washers and dryers with unusual intensity. He coached Sophie's soccer practice with forced enthusiasm. He had dinner with Rachel and pretended everything was fine. And every evening he'd see Victoria across the street, both of them trapped in the same waiting period, both wondering if this crazy plan would actually work or if they'd just complicated their lives for nothing. On day 12, Victoria texted him. "Can we talk?" He found her sitting on her porch, wrapped in a blanket despite the mild evening. "I'm scared," she said when he sat down beside her. "Of it working or not working?" "Both." She pulled the blanket tighter. "If it doesn't work, I don't know if I can go through this again. And if it does work, I don't know if I can actually do this. Be a mother again. What if I'm not strong enough?" "You're strong enough to ask a stranger for help. That takes more courage than most people have. You're not a stranger anymore." He realized she was right. Somewhere between midnight confessions and lawyer meetings and clinical appointments, they'd become something else, not quite friends, not exactly partners, but connected in a way that defied easy definition. "No," he agreed. "I guess I'm not." They sat in silence, watching the neighborhood settle into night. 2 more days, Victoria whispered. 2 more days. The test was negative. Victoria called him at 7 in the morning, her voice flat and mechanical. "It didn't work. The clinic just confirmed." Adrian sat on the edge of his bed, phone pressed to his ear, trying to find the right words. "I'm sorry." "Me too." A pause. "They said it's normal. First attempts fail more often than they succeed. We can try again in 6 weeks. Do you want to try again?" The silence stretched so long Adrian thought she'd hung up. Then, "I don't know. Ask me in 6 weeks." She disconnected before he could respond. Adrian stood at his window and looked across the street. Victoria's car was in the driveway, but the house was dark, all the curtains drawn. He thought about going over there, knocking on the door, offering some kind of comfort. But what would he say? What comfort could he possibly offer for a grief this specific? He decided to give her space. That was a mistake. 3 days passed without any sign of her. No car leaving for work, no lights on at night. On the 4th day, Adrian's concern overrode his hesitation. He crossed the street and knocked. No answer. He knocked harder. "Victoria, it's Adrian." Still nothing. He tried the doorknob, unlocked. His heart kicked into overdrive as he pushed the door open. "Victoria?" The house was dim, curtains blocking most of the daylight. He found her in the living room, sitting on the floor in front of the coffee table, surrounded by photo albums. She was still wearing what looked like pajamas from 3 days ago. Her hair was unwashed. The photos of Michael and Emma had been taken down from their frames and spread across every surface. "Victoria." She looked up, and the emptiness in her eyes terrified him more than tears would have. I thought I could do this, she said quietly. I thought if I just tried hard enough, wanted it badly enough, it would work. Because that's how it's supposed to work, right? You want something, you work for it, you get it. She gestured at the photos. But that's not true. I wanted my family to survive that accident. Worked every day for 5 years trying to survive it myself. And I'm still here, still broken, still alone. Adrian crouched down beside her, careful not to touch the photos. You're not alone right now. Aren't I? She picked up a photo of Emma, maybe 2 years old, covered in birthday cake. I failed at keeping my first child alive. Now I can't even create a second one. What does that say about me? It says you're human. It says the universe doesn't care how much we want things. That's supposed to be comforting? No, but it's true. Victoria set down the photo with shaking hands. The doctor said we can try again. Like it's that simple. Just try again. Keep trying until it works, or I run out of money or time or sanity. She finally looked at him. I don't know if I can do that. Go through this again. The hope and the waiting and the failure. Adrian sat down on the floor beside her, his back against the couch. Then don't. Not right now. Give yourself time to breathe. I'm 30 years old, Adrian. I don't have unlimited time. You have 6 weeks until you can try again. That's plenty of time to decide if you want to. She pulled her knees to her chest, looking smaller than he'd ever seen her. What if it never works? What if we do this 5 times, 10 times, and it never happens? Then we deal with that if we get there. But you can't live in the what-ifs. Trust me, I tried that after Rebecca left. Nearly drove me crazy. They sat in silence for a while, surrounded by the ghosts of Victoria's past. I should clean this up, she said eventually, gesturing at the photos. Put them back. This is pathetic. It's not pathetic. It's grief. There's a difference. Is there? Yeah, grief is human. Pathetic is giving up without trying. Victoria laughed, but it came out broken. You're bad at pep talks. I know, Sophie tells me all the time. That got a real smile, small but genuine. How is she? Confused about why the sad lady across the street hasn't been outside in days. She called me that? The sad lady? She's 6. Subtlety isn't her strong suit. Victoria started gathering photos, carefully, reverently. I'm sorry for dragging you into this mess, for making you part of my breakdown. You didn't drag me anywhere. I walked into this with my eyes open. Did you? Because I think I sold you a version of this that was cleaner than reality. Hopeful mother seeks help creating new life. Very touching, very simple. Not desperate widow spiraling on her living room floor surrounded by pictures of dead people. Adrian helped her stack the photo albums. I knew what I was signing up for. Maybe not the specifics, but I knew it would be messy. Life's always messy when it matters. That's almost profound. Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation as a simple appliance repair guy to maintain. She laughed again, and this time it sounded more real. They spent the next hour putting photos back in frames, returning albums to shelves. Adrian made coffee while Victoria showered and changed. When she emerged, looking more like herself, she found him in her kitchen examining her expensive espresso machine. Don't even think about fixing that, she said. It's the one thing in this house that actually works. I was just admiring it. This is a $2,000 machine. Closer to 3, actually. Coffee is my one indulgence. Your one indulgence. You're a billionaire. And yet the thing I spend the most money on is really good coffee and therapy. Says something about priorities, I guess. Adrian poured them both cups from the pot he'd made. Simple drip coffee. Nothing fancy. They sat at her kitchen table, and for the first time since the negative test, Victoria looked like she might actually survive this. 6 weeks, she said. That's what you said. 6 weeks to decide. That's what the doctor said. I just repeated it. And if I decide I can't do it again? If I decide this was a terrible idea and I want out, then we walk away. No harm, no foul. Well, some harm, some very awkward neighborly waves, but no legal complications. Victoria wrapped her hands around the coffee mug. You'd be okay with that? Adrian thought about it honestly. Disappointed, maybe. I'd gotten used to the idea of helping you, but okay? Yeah, I'd be okay. My life would go back to normal and you'd figure out your next move. What if my next move is giving up entirely? Then I'd probably come knock on your door again and tell you that's not allowed. You can't stop me from giving up. No, but I can be annoying about it." She smiled despite herself. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone more judgmental, maybe. Someone who'd write me off as crazy and walk away." "I did think you were crazy. Still do, actually, but crazy doesn't mean wrong." Victoria stared into her coffee. "I need these 6 weeks, not just to heal physically, but to figure out if I actually want this or if I just want to want this. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why did you say yes? Really? Not the noble reasons or the stuff you tell yourself at night, the real reason." Adrian set down his mug and considered the question. "Because I saw something in you that I recognized, that desperate need to matter to someone, to have your existence mean something beyond just going through motions." He met her eyes. "I've spent 4 years being the best dad I can be to Sophie, and I love her more than anything, but there's still this part of me that wonders if this is all there is. Work and routine and playing it safe. And when you showed up asking for help, it felt like the universe was offering me a chance to be part of something bigger." That's a lot of pressure to put on having a baby. "I know, but you asked for the real reason, not the smart reason." Victoria reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Just once, briefly, but the gesture felt significant. "Thank you for being honest. That's what we agreed to, right? No bullshit, no pretending things are simpler than they are." "Right." Adrian stood to leave. "Take your 6 weeks. Figure out what you want. I'll be across the street whenever you decide." "Adrian?" He turned back. "I'm glad it was you. If I had to do this with someone, I'm glad it was you." "Me too." He let himself out and walked back across the street, feeling the weight of the past few days settling into his bones. Inside his house, Sophie was at the kitchen table doing homework with Rachel supervising. "How is she?" Rachel asked quietly while Sophie was focused on her math problems. "She's been better, but she'll be okay." "And you? How are you?" Adrian sank into a chair. "Honestly, I don't know. This whole thing is more complicated than I thought it would be." Most important things are. Over the next 6 weeks, Adrian and Victoria fell into a strange new pattern. They'd have coffee once a week, sometimes at her place, sometimes at the cafe. They talked about everything except the decision hanging between them. She told him about her work, the AI company she'd built, and mostly ignored now. He told her about Sophie's school drama, the complicated social dynamics of first grade. They became something like friends. On week 3, Victoria showed up at his garage while he was fixing a dryer. "Need help?" she asked. "You know how to repair appliances?" "No, but I know how to hand you tools and pretend to be useful." She stayed for 2 hours, asking questions about how things worked, making him laugh with her complete ignorance of basic mechanical principles. When she left, Adrian realized he'd enjoyed himself. Not because of the failed pregnancy or the arrangement between them, but just because Victoria was good company. On week 5, they took Sophie to the park together. It wasn't planned. Victoria had been walking past when Adrian was loading Sophie into the car, and Sophie had invited her. At the playground, Adrian watched Victoria watch his daughter play, saw the pain and longing in her eyes, but also something else, something lighter. "She's wonderful," Victoria said. "You've done an incredible job with her." "I got lucky. She's naturally good-hearted. I just try not to screw it up too badly." Sophie ran over, breathless and grinning. "Miss Victoria, do you want to go on the swings?" Victoria looked at Adrian, uncertainty flickering across her face. "Go ahead," he said. "I'll be right here." He watched them swing together, Sophie chattering away while Victoria listened and smiled and pushed her higher when she asked. For a moment, it looked almost normal, like they were just a family spending Sunday at the park. That night, after Sophie was in bed, Victoria texted him. "Thank you for today. You don't have to thank me. Sophie invited you." Still, it meant a lot. "I haven't been around kids since Emma. It was harder than I expected, but also easier. Does that make sense?" "Yeah, it does. I've made my decision." Adrian's heart stuttered. He stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "And? I want to try again, if you're still willing." He should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt terrified and excited and completely uncertain. "I'm still willing." "Okay, I'll call the clinic tomorrow." "Victoria?" "Yeah?" "We've got this. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out. I hope you're right." The second attempt was less awkward than the first, though no less strange. They were both more prepared this time, knew what to expect from the clinical process and the emotional aftermath. "Here we go again," Victoria said in the parking lot afterward. "Here we go again," Adrian agreed. The waiting was worse the second time. Knowing it might fail made every day feel heavier. Adrian threw himself into work and parenting, trying not to count down the days. Victoria did the same, disappearing into her work, emerging only for their weekly coffee dates. On day 10, she showed up at his door unannounced. "I couldn't sit in that house anymore," she said. "Can I just hang out here for a while? I promise not to be weird." "Sure. Fair warning, I'm making dinner and Sophie's in a mood." "Perfect. That sounds exactly like the kind of normal I need right now." She sat at his kitchen table while he made spaghetti, Thursday tradition, and helped Sophie with a school project about family trees that was proving complicated given Sophie's situation. "So I just draw you and me?" Sophie asked Adrian, frustrated. "You can draw whoever you consider family," he said. "There's no wrong answer." Sophie chewed on her pencil, thinking. Then she drew Adrian, herself, and added another figure. "Can I draw Aunt Rachel?" "Of course." She drew Rachel, then looked up at Victoria. "Should I draw you?" The question hung in the air. Adrian froze, spatula in hand. Victoria's expression went through several emotions in quick succession: surprise, uncertainty, something that might have been hope. "That's up to you, sweetheart. Do you consider me family?" Sophie tilted her head, considering. "I don't know yet. You're my friend. Maybe we could be family later." "That sounds perfect." Crisis averted, Sophie went back to her drawing while Adrian and Victoria exchanged glances over her head. After dinner, after Sophie's bath and bedtime story, Victoria was still there, helping clean the kitchen. "Your daughter is wise beyond her years," she said, drying dishes Adrian washed. "She has her moments. Other times she puts her shoes on the wrong feet and insists they're fine." The duality of 6-year-olds. They worked in comfortable silence until the dishes were done. "I should go," Victoria said, but she didn't move. "You okay to be alone? You can stay if you need to, watch TV or whatever. I'm just going to do some paperwork in the other room." She looked at him with such gratitude it almost hurt. "Really?" "Really. You're right. Your house is too quiet. Stay as long as you want." She did. Adrian worked on invoices in the dining room while Victoria watched some cooking show in the living room. It was domestic and weird and strangely comfortable. When he walked her out around 10, she paused on his porch. "This is going to sound crazy. Everything about this situation is crazy." She smiled. "Fair. But I was going to say, I don't feel as alone when I'm around you, not because of the baby thing, just because you make the world feel less heavy. You do the same for me. I didn't realize how isolated I'd become until you knocked on my door in the rain." "So we're both using each other for emotional support?" "I prefer to think of it as mutual friendship with incredibly complicated circumstances." "That works too." 4 days later, Victoria called at 6 in the morning. Adrian fumbled for his phone, heart pounding, expecting bad news. "It worked." Her voice was shaking. "Adrian, it worked. I'm pregnant." He sat up so fast he got dizzy. "You're sure?" "I'm holding the test right now. 2 lines. Very clearly 2 lines. I'm pregnant." Adrian's mind went blank. Then it filled with 1,000 thoughts at once. "Holy shit. Yeah, holy shit. How are you feeling?" "Terrified, excited, like I'm going to throw up, all of the above." A pause. "Can you come over? I know it's early and Sophie's probably still asleep, but I don't want to be alone right now. Give me 10 minutes. He threw on clothes, left a note for Sophie in case she woke up, and practically ran across the street. Victoria opened the door before he could knock, still in her pajamas, holding the pregnancy test like it might disappear. She was crying and smiling at the same time. "I'm going to be a mother again," she whispered. "I'm actually going to be a mother." Adrian pulled her into a hug without thinking. She collapsed against him, her whole body shaking with sobs that were equal parts joy and relief and terror. "You're going to be great," he said into her hair. "You're going to be so great at this." "What if something goes wrong? What if I lose this baby too?" "Then we'll deal with it. But right now, right this second, you're pregnant and everything is okay. So let's just be in this moment." She pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I need to call the doctor, schedule appointments. Oh my God, there's so much to do." It's 6 in the morning. The doctor's office isn't even open yet. Right, right. She laughed, slightly hysterical. I'm not thinking clearly. Sit down before you pass out. He guided her to the couch, went to her kitchen, and made tea because he had no idea what else to do. When he brought it back, she was staring at the pregnancy test like it held the secrets of the universe. This is real, she said. This is actually happening. This is actually happening. Are you freaking out? Adrian sat beside her. Completely, but also kind of amazed. We did this. This insane plan actually worked. Victoria set down the test and turned to face him. I need you to know something. Whatever happens from here, however involved you want to be or not be, I will never regret this. You gave me back hope. You gave me a future to look forward to. Thank you doesn't cover it, but thank you. You don't have to thank me. We did this together. Still, they sat there as the sun came up, both of them trying to process the enormity of what they'd started. Across the street, Adrian saw his porch light come on. Sophie was awake. I should get back before she panics. Okay, but Adrian, can we tell her soon about the baby? I don't want secrets. Yeah, we'll tell her. Just let me figure out how to explain that her dad helped make a baby with the neighbor without making it sound completely insane. Victoria laughed. Good luck with that. He headed for the door, then turned back. Are you going to be okay? Do you want me to come back after I get Sophie off to school? No, yes, I'll be okay. I think I need to sit with this for a while, process it alone. But maybe coffee later this week? Coffee later this week. Adrian walked back across the street as Sophie opened the front door. Where were you? With Miss Victoria. She had some news. Good news or bad news? Adrian thought about Victoria's tears and joy and terror all mixed together. Really good news. Come on, let's make breakfast. We need to talk about something. Over pancakes, animal-shaped this time, because the day felt momentous enough to warrant it, Adrian tried to find the right words. Remember how we talked about Miss Victoria maybe having a baby? Sophie's eyes went wide. She's having a baby? Yeah, she is. Is it a girl or a boy? We won't know that for a while, but Sophie, there's something else. The baby is going to be your sister or brother. Half-sister or brother, technically. Do you understand what that means? Sophie thought about it, her 6-year-old brain working through the implications. You helped her make the baby? Yeah, I did. So the baby will be related to me? Exactly. Sophie considered this while methodically cutting her dinosaur pancake into precise pieces. Finally, cool. I always wanted a sibling. Adrian had to laugh at the simplicity of her acceptance. That's it? Just cool? What else should I say? I don't know. Most kids would have more questions. Will the baby live here? No, the baby will live with Miss Victoria. But we can visit? Whenever Miss Victoria says it's okay. Then yeah, it's cool. She took a bite of pancake, then looked up at him. Daddy, are you happy about the baby? The question stopped him. Was he happy? Terrified? Yes. Overwhelmed? Absolutely. But happy? Yeah, kiddo, I think I am. Good. You smile more when Miss Victoria is around. I like it when you smile. Out of the mouths of children. The first trimester was harder than either of them expected. Victoria was sick constantly, exhausted, and terrified something would go wrong. Adrian found himself checking in on her daily, bringing her ginger tea and crackers, sitting with her during the worst of the nausea. This is ridiculous, she said one afternoon, sprawled on her couch looking miserable. I wanted this so badly, and now I feel like death. That's pregnancy. Sophie's mom was sick for 4 months straight. How did she survive? Spite and saltine crackers, mostly. Victoria laughed weakly. I can do spite. The first ultrasound was at 8 weeks. Victoria had asked if Adrian wanted to come, and after some hesitation, he'd said yes. They sat in the clinic waiting room trying to look like a normal couple, which they definitely were not. You okay? He asked. Ask me after we see the heartbeat. The technician was kind and professional, spreading gel on Victoria's stomach and moving the wand around. For a long moment, there was only static and blurry shapes. Then a rhythmic whooshing filled the room. There's your baby, the technician said, pointing to a blob on the screen. Strong heartbeat. Everything looks good. Victoria's hand found Adrian's and squeezed hard. She was crying again, but this time purely from joy. "That's my baby," she whispered. "That's my baby." Adrian stared at the screen at the tiny flickering heartbeat and felt something shift inside him. This wasn't abstract anymore. This wasn't a plan or an arrangement or a favor for a desperate woman. This was a child, a real child, half his. The realization hit him like a physical force. "You okay?" Victoria asked, noticing his expression. "Yeah, just realizing how real this is." "Having regrets?" "No, just processing." They left with ultrasound photos and a due date, May 15th. Victoria clutched the photos the entire drive home, staring at them like they might disappear. "I need to tell my family," she said. "My mother is going to lose her mind. She's been begging me to move on for years." "How do you think she'll react?" "Honestly, she'll probably cry for 3 days straight and then show up with a truckload of baby supplies. She's been wanting to be a grandmother again since Emma died." "And telling her about me? About the arrangement?" Victoria's expression turned serious. "I'm going to tell her the truth. That you helped me when no one else would. That you're a good man and we have an agreement. If she has a problem with it, that's her issue." She called her mother that evening. Adrian could hear the conversation from across the street through his open window, Victoria's voice rising and falling, then her mother's excited shrieking. Later, Victoria texted him. "She's thrilled. Also wants to meet you. Fair warning, she's intense." "Looking forward to it," Adrian lied. But when Victoria's mother showed up 2 days later, she surprised him. Jane Sinclair was in her early 60s, elegant and warm, with her daughter's eyes and a directness that was either refreshing or terrifying depending on your perspective. "You must be Adrian," she said when Victoria introduced them. "Thank you for helping my daughter. I don't know your story or why you said yes, but I'm grateful." "You're welcome." "Can I meet Sophie? Victoria says she's lovely." Adrian brought Sophie out, who immediately charmed Jane with a detailed explanation of her current favorite cartoon that made absolutely no sense to anyone over the age of 7. "She's delightful," Jane told Adrian later while Sophie was showing Victoria her room. "And you've raised her well, from what I can see." "I try." "Victoria told me about your arrangement, about the boundaries you've set." Jane studied him carefully. "I have one question. Are you going to stay in this child's life?" Adrian had been dreading this question. "I don't know yet. We've agreed I can decide as we go." "That's honest. I appreciate honest." She glanced toward the stairs where they could hear Sophie and Victoria laughing about something. "My daughter has been broken for a long time. This baby won't fix that. But it's given her something I haven't seen in years. Hope. Whatever you decide about your involvement, please don't take that away from her." "I won't, I promise." The pregnancy progressed. 12 weeks, then 16, then 20. Victoria started showing her body changing in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. Adrian found himself noticing things, the way she'd rest her hand on her stomach when she thought no one was looking, the soft smile she'd get when the baby kicked. At the 20-week ultrasound, they found out the sex. "Do you want to know?" the technician asked. Victoria looked at Adrian. "Do you?" "It's your call." "I want to know." "I need to know." The technician smiled. "You're having a girl." Victoria's face crumpled. "A girl? Oh my God, a girl." Adrian's chest tightened. A daughter, another daughter. The weight of it settled over him like a blanket. In the parking lot afterward, Victoria sat in her car and sobbed. Adrian sat with her, not saying anything, just being present while she processed the enormity of having another daughter after losing one. "I don't know if I can name her," she finally said. "Every name I think of feels wrong. Too close to Emma, or too different, or just wrong. You have time, 4 more months. Will you help me? When it's time? I trust your judgment." The request felt significant, intimate. "Yeah, I'll help." That night, Adrian lay awake thinking about the baby girl who would be here in 4 months. His daughter, but not his daughter. Connected to him, but separate. The arrangement had seemed so clear on paper, but reality was messier. He was falling in love with a child who didn't exist yet, and he had no idea what to do about it. The realization that he was falling in love with an unborn child kept Adrian awake most nights. He'd lie there staring at the ceiling, trying to untangle what he was feeling from what he was supposed to feel according to their agreement. The document they'd signed said he could be as involved or uninvolved as he wanted. It didn't say anything about what to do when you started caring more than you'd planned. By Victoria's 24th week, Adrian was attending every doctor's appointment. He told himself it was just to be supportive, to make sure she wasn't alone. But the truth was harder to ignore. He wanted to be there. Wanted to see the ultrasounds, hear the heartbeat, watch this baby grow. "You don't have to come to all of these," Victoria said one morning as they sat in yet another waiting room. "I know you have work. I want to be here." She studied his face. "That's new. In the beginning, you looked like you were attending a funeral. Now you look almost excited. Is that a problem?" "No, just different from what we agreed on." She shifted in her seat, one hand on her growing belly. "I need to know, Adrian. Are you changing your mind about involvement? Because if you are, we need to talk about it now, not after she's born." The direct question forced him to confront what he'd been avoiding. "I don't know what I want anymore. The agreement made sense when this was all theoretical, but now there's a real baby in there, and she's half mine, and I can't just pretend I don't care." "I'm not asking you to pretend anything." "Then what are you asking?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "I'm asking if you're prepared for what involvement actually means. Not just the cute parts, holding her, watching her grow, but the hard parts, the 3 a.m. feedings, the tantrums, the teenage years, because I can't have you halfway in. Sophie needs consistency. This baby needs consistency, and I need to know you're not going to panic and disappear when it gets difficult. I raised Sophie alone from age 2. I know what difficult looks like. This is different. Sophie is yours completely. This baby will be shared in ways we haven't fully defined yet. That's more complicated." Before Adrian could respond, the nurse called Victoria's name. The appointment was routine: measurements, heartbeat, questions about movement. The doctor seemed pleased with everything. As they were leaving, Victoria paused in the parking lot. "I'm sorry if I was harsh in there. I'm just scared." "Of what?" "Of getting used to having you around and then losing you. Of this baby getting attached to you and then you deciding it's too much. Of—" She stopped, shook her head. "Never mind. Say it." "Of caring about you more than is probably smart given our situation." The admission hung between them like smoke. Adrian's heart was pounding. What does that mean? It means somewhere between midnight coffee talks and ultrasound appointments, and you bringing me ginger tea when I'm sick, I started looking forward to seeing you, not because of the baby, just because. She met his eyes. "And that's not what we agreed to either." "No," Adrian said quietly. "It's not." They stood there in the clinic parking lot, both of them suddenly aware they'd crossed some invisible line neither had acknowledged until now. "We should probably talk about this," Victoria said. "Yeah, we should." But neither of them knew where to start. That evening, Adrian sat Sophie down for another talk. She was 7 now, a full year older than when this had all started, and perceptive enough to notice things he wished she wouldn't. "Is Miss Victoria your girlfriend?" she asked out of nowhere while they were doing dishes. Adrian nearly dropped the plate he was washing. "What? No, why would you think that?" "Because you smile at her the way Prince Eric smiles at Ariel in the movie." "I do not smile like a cartoon prince." "You kinda do." Sophie handed him another plate. "It's okay if you like her, Daddy. She's nice, and she's having your baby, so it makes sense." "It's more complicated than that, sweetheart." "Why? You like her, she likes you, you're having a baby together. Seems simple." If only it were that simple. Later that night, after Sophie was asleep, Adrian found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He called his ex-wife. Rebecca answered on the 4th ring, her voice wary. "Adrian? Is Sophie okay?" "She's fine. I need advice, and you're the only person who might understand." "That's a first. What's going on?" He told her everything. The whole insane story from Victoria's knock in the rain to the pregnancy to his current confusion. Rebecca listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Are you in love with her?" "I don't know, maybe. It's complicated." "It's only complicated because you're making it complicated. You helped this woman have a baby. You've been there for every appointment. You care about her. Unless I'm missing something, those are the ingredients for a relationship. We had an agreement, boundaries. I'm not supposed to Adrian, stop. You're overthinking this like you overthink everything. Here's the real question. If you could have a life with this woman, and this baby, and Sophie, would you want it? He didn't even have to think about it. Yes. Then tell her that. What if she doesn't want the same thing? What if she's just grateful and I'm misreading everything? Rebecca laughed, and it reminded him why he'd once loved her. She'd always been able to cut through his spiraling thoughts. From what you've told me, she's already admitted she cares about you. The only question is whether you're both brave enough to admit you want more than your agreement allows. When did you get wise? Probably around the time I stopped running from things that scared me. Listen, I was a terrible wife and an even worse mother. I know that. But I learned something in the past 5 years. Life's too short to hide from the things that might actually make you happy just because they're complicated. After they hung up, Adrian sat on his porch and looked across the street. Victoria's lights were on. He could see her moving past the windows, her silhouette clearly pregnant now. His phone buzzed. A text from her. Can't sleep. Baby's doing gymnastics. You up? Yeah. Want company? Please. He crossed the street and found her on her couch, hand on her belly, looking exhausted and beautiful and completely overwhelmed. She won't stop moving, Victoria said. I think she's training for the Olympics in there. Adrian sat beside her. Can I feel? She guided his hand to her stomach. For a moment, nothing. Then a strong kick right against his palm. Another one. The baby was active. Wow, he breathed. Right? She's been doing this for an hour. Victoria smiled tiredly. I keep thinking Emma was never this active. She was a calm baby. This one is already showing she's different. That's probably good. Different means she's her own person. I know. It's just hard sometimes, not comparing them. They sat in comfortable silence, Adrian's hand still on her belly, feeling his daughter move. Their daughter. The possessive pronoun felt right in a way it hadn't before. We need to talk, he said. I know, I've been avoiding it. Me too, but I think we're past the point where avoiding it helps anyone. Victoria shifted to face him. Okay, you first. Adrian took a breath. The agreement we made was smart. Clear boundaries, defined roles, protection for everyone involved. But I don't think I can stick to it anymore. These past few months, being part of this pregnancy, getting to know you beyond just the neighbor across the street, I care about you, Victoria. Not just as the mother of this baby, but as a person. And I don't know what to do with that. Do you want to do something with it? I think so, but I'm terrified of screwing this up, of making things more complicated when they're already complicated enough, of hurting Sophie, or you, or this baby, by wanting more than I should. Victoria was quiet, her hand resting on her belly where Adrian's had been moments before. Can I tell you something? A few weeks ago, my friend called, one of the few who stayed in touch after the accident. She's getting married next month, wanted to know if I'd come to the wedding. I said yes because I'm trying to be normal again. Then she asked if I was bringing anyone. What did you say? I almost said your name. Then I caught myself because what would I even call you? The guy who helped me get pregnant? The friend who goes to my doctor appointments? It's not like I could say boyfriend when we've explicitly agreed this isn't a relationship. But you wanted to say it? Yeah, I wanted to say I was bringing you because the idea of going alone, of answering everyone's questions about the baby and the father and my life, without you there felt impossible. She finally met his eyes. I've been telling myself for months that what I feel for you is just gratitude, that I'm confusing appreciation with something deeper. But that's a lie. I look forward to seeing you in ways that have nothing to do with the baby. I think about you when you're not around. She stopped, swallowed hard. I'm falling for you, Adrian. And it terrifies me because I've already lost everyone I ever loved. Adrian felt like his heart might break through his chest. I'm falling for you too. The words hung in the air between them. So what do we do? Victoria whispered. I don't know. Our situation is already messy. Adding a relationship into it makes it messier. Is messy always bad? No, but messy with kids involved is risky. Sophie's already attached to you. If we try this and it doesn't work, she loses someone else. This baby grows up watching her parents fail at being together. That's a lot of potential damage. Victoria's expression hardened slightly. So what are you saying? We just ignore what we feel and stick to the agreement? I'm saying we need to be really sure before we risk everything we've built. I am sure. Victoria's, No, listen, I spent 5 years alone because I was too scared to let anyone in. Too scared they'd leave or die or realize I was too broken to love. But you've seen me broken. You've seen me at my worst, crying on the floor surrounded by photos, sick and miserable, terrified and desperate. And you're still here. So yes, I'm sure. The question is whether you are. Adrian wanted to say yes, wanted to pull her close and kiss her and promise they'd figure everything out together. But the weight of responsibility, to Sophie, to this unborn baby, to Victoria herself, kept him frozen. I need time, he said finally. Not to decide if I care about you. I know I do. But to figure out how to do this right. How to protect everyone while still being honest about what I want. The disappointment on Victoria's face was like a knife. Okay, take your time. But Adrian, don't take so long that you talk yourself out of something real just because it's scary. He left shortly after, crossing back to his house with his heart and mind at war. Inside, he checked on Sophie, still sleeping peacefully, and then sat at his kitchen table with his head in his hands. The smart thing would be to maintain boundaries. Stick to the agreement. Help Victoria raise this baby from a safe distance and not risk complicating things with romance. But when had he ever wanted to just do the smart thing? 2 days later, Victoria's mother showed up unannounced at Adrian's door. We need to talk, Jane said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Adrian invited her in, his stomach churning. This couldn't be good. Jane sat at his kitchen table and got straight to the point. My daughter told me you're having cold feet about your feelings for her. That's not exactly… Let me finish. I've watched Victoria survive the unsurvivable. I've watched her try to date, try to move on, try to build a life in the wreckage of the one she lost. Every man she's met has been intimidated by her grief, her money, or her strength. You're the first person who's seen all of those things and stayed anyway. Jane leaned forward. So I'm going to ask you directly. Do you love my daughter? The question was so blunt, Adrian couldn't hide behind careful wording. Yes. Then what's the problem? The problem is I have a 7-year-old daughter who's already been abandoned by her mother. If Victoria and I try to be together and it doesn't work, Sophie loses another person she cares about. I can't risk that. And if you don't try, Sophie watches her father choose fear over love. You think that's a better lesson? Adrian had no response to that. Jane softened slightly. I understand wanting to protect your daughter. I protected Victoria too much after the accident, and it nearly destroyed her. But at some point, you have to trust that the people you love are resilient enough to survive things not being perfect. After Jane left, Adrian couldn't stop thinking about her words. That night, he asked Rachel to watch Sophie and drove to the beach, a 2-hour drive that gave him time to think. He walked along the empty shore as the sun set, trying to untangle the knot in his chest. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Hope you're okay. Thinking about you. He stared at the message for a long time before typing back. I'm scared. Me too. But I don't want to be scared alone anymore. What does that mean? Adrian took a breath and made a choice. It means I'm done overthinking this. Can I come over when I get back into town? Yes. Please. He drove back faster than he should have, his heart racing the entire way. It was nearly 10 when he pulled into his driveway. Victoria was sitting on her porch waiting, wrapped in a blanket against the spring chill. You came, she said. I came. He crossed the street and sat beside her. I've been thinking about what you said, about being sure. And you're right. I've seen you broken, and I'm still here. But you've also seen me terrified and overprotective and completely out of my depth, and you're still here too. So maybe we're both sure, and we've just been too scared to admit it. What changed? Your mother scared some sense into me, and I realized something on the drive. I've spent 4 years protecting Sophie by keeping our world small and safe. But maybe the best way to protect her is to show her that love is worth the risk, even when it's messy, even when it's complicated. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying I want to try, for real. Not just co-parenting from across the street, but actually being together. You and me and Sophie and this baby. A real family, however imperfect that looks. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. You're sure? I'm terrified, but yeah, I'm sure. Victoria kissed him then, and it felt like falling and flying at the same time. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying. "We're going to screw this up sometimes," she said. "I'm going to be difficult and broken and probably a mess as a new mother again. And I'm going to be overprotective and stubborn and probably panic about 15 times a day." Sounds perfect. They sat on her porch holding hands while the neighborhood slept around them, two broken people choosing to be broken together rather than alone. The next morning, Adrian told Sophie over breakfast. She was surprisingly calm about it. "So Miss Victoria is your girlfriend now?" "Yeah, she is. How do you feel about that?" Sophie shrugged. "I told you it was going to happen. Adults are so slow." "You're 7, and smarter than you about feelings." She wasn't wrong. The following weeks were a strange adjustment. They told Victoria's doctor, who seemed completely unfazed by the relationship development. They told Rachel, who said finally, and then gave Adrian a lecture about not screwing it up. They told Victoria's mother, who cried happy tears and immediately started planning ways to combine households. "She's getting ahead of herself," Victoria said, after a particularly enthusiastic phone call where Jane had discussed room configurations. "We haven't even talked about living together." "Do you want to?" Adrian asked. They were at her place, Victoria lying on the couch with her feet in Adrian's lap while he rubbed them. Pregnancy had made her ankles swell. "Eventually, maybe. But I think we should take this slow, figure out how to be together before we make big changes." She looked at him. "Is that okay?" "More than okay. I'm still processing that we're actually doing this." "Having regrets?" "Not even a little." What surprised Adrian most was how natural it felt. They'd spent months building a friendship around doctor appointments and shared fears. Adding romance to that foundation felt less like a dramatic shift and more like acknowledging something that had been there all along. They went on actual dates, dinner at quiet restaurants, walks through the park, one memorable evening at a comedy show where Victoria laughed so hard she worried she'd go into early labor. They held hands, they kissed, they talked about futures that included both of them, but it wasn't perfect. 3 weeks into officially being together, they had their first real fight. It started over something small, Adrian mentioning that his sister had invited them to a family barbecue. Victoria had hesitated and Adrian had pushed, asking why she seemed reluctant. "I'm not reluctant, I'm just tired. I'm 32 weeks pregnant and exhausted all the time." "It's a barbecue, not a marathon. You can sit the whole time." "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" Victoria's expression shifted to something harder. "The point is, you're pushing me to meet your entire extended family when I'm barely holding it together most days. The point is, I haven't even figured out how to exist in your life yet, and you're trying to integrate me everywhere. I thought you wanted to be part of my life." "I do, but on my timeline, not yours." The argument escalated from there, both of them saying things they didn't quite mean. It ended with Victoria asking Adrian to leave and him storming across the street feeling angry and confused and scared they'd made a terrible mistake. He called Rachel, who listened to his rant before cutting through it. "You do realize you're both just scared, right? You're scared she's pulling away. She's scared you're moving too fast. Neither of you is actually mad about the barbecue." "Then what are we mad about?" "You're mad because relationships are hard and you're both out of practice. But here's the thing, being able to fight and come back from it is more important than never fighting at all." Adrian knew she was right. He waited 2 hours for both of them to cool down, then texted Victoria. "I'm sorry. You're right. I was pushing. I'm sorry too. I'm scared and took it out on you. Can we talk? Please." They met on neutral ground, the park bench where they used to have coffee in the early days. Victoria looked exhausted, one hand on her belly, the other wrapped around a water bottle. "I'm terrible at this," she said as soon as he sat down. "At what?" "Relationships. Being vulnerable. Letting someone in. I thought I was ready, but I'm clearly not." "You're doing fine. I just asked you to leave because you invited me to a barbecue." "To be fair, I was being pushy about it." Victoria managed a weak smile. "We're a mess." "Yeah, but maybe we're a mess together, which is better than being a mess alone." "Is it though? Because right now it feels like I'm dragging you into my dysfunction." Adrian took her hand. "Here's what I think. I think we're both terrified of different things. You're scared I'm going to want too much too fast and overwhelm you. I'm scared you're going to realize this is too hard and pull away. So we're both being defensive in different directions." That's probably accurate. So what do we do about it? Victoria was quiet for a long moment. We talk more. We're honest when we're overwhelmed instead of letting it build up. And we remember that we're on the same team even when it doesn't feel like it. I can do that. Me too. And Adrian, I do want to meet your family, just maybe after the baby's born and I'm not a hormonal exhausted mess. Deal. They sat on that bench until the sun started setting, talking through expectations and fears and the 100 small misunderstandings that had led to their fight. It wasn't easy or comfortable, but it was real. And real, Adrian was learning, was more valuable than perfect. The baby was due in 6 weeks. Victoria's nesting instinct had kicked in with a vengeance. Her house was filled with carefully organized baby supplies, books on parenting, and enough tiny clothes to dress triplets. I think I'm compensating, she admitted one evening while Adrian helped her assemble a crib. Trying to control everything I can because I can't control whether I'll be a good mother this time. You were a good mother before. You'll be a good mother again. I had 3 years with Emma. 3 years to learn who she was, what she needed. This baby is starting from scratch, and I'm terrified I've forgotten how. Adrian set down the screwdriver and pulled her close. You're going to be amazing, and you're not doing this alone. You have me. You have your mom. You have an entire support system. It's not going to be like before. Promise? Promise. 2 weeks before the due date, Victoria woke Adrian with a panicked phone call at 3 in the morning. Something's wrong. I'm bleeding. Not a lot, but enough that I'm scared. I'll be right there. He threw on clothes, left a note for Sophie, and ran across the street. Victoria was sitting on her bathroom floor, pale and shaking. The hospital, he said. We're going now. The emergency room visit was terrifying. Victoria was admitted immediately. Monitors attached to her belly, doctors asking questions Adrian didn't know how to answer. For 2 hours they waited while medical staff checked and rechecked, while Victoria gripped his hand hard enough to hurt. Finally, the doctor came in with news. Everything looks okay. The bleeding was likely from a minor placental issue, nothing that endangers the baby. But we want to keep you overnight for observation. Victoria burst into tears of relief. Adrian stayed with her, sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair, waking every time a nurse came to check vitals. In the early morning light, Victoria looked at him with such raw emotion it hurt. You didn't have to stay. Yes, I did. This isn't what you signed up for. The agreement said you could be as involved as you wanted. Sleeping in hospital chairs at 4 a.m. is pretty involved. Victoria, I love you. That means hospital chairs and midnight scares and all of it. That's what I signed up for the moment I decided to actually be with you. It was the first time he'd said it directly. The words hung in the air between them. You love me. Yeah, I do. She started crying again. I love you too. I've been too scared to say it. I know, me too. When they released Victoria that afternoon with instructions to take it easy, Adrian drove her home and insisted on staying. He made her comfortable on the couch, called his sister to pick up Sophie from school, and spent the day making sure Victoria rested. This is nice, she said at one point, having someone take care of me. Get used to it. You're stuck with me now. Is that a threat or a promise? Both. Sophie came home that evening full of questions about the baby and whether everything was okay. Adrian explained in terms a 7-year-old could understand. Sometimes babies need extra attention, but everything was fine now. Can I see Miss Victoria? If she's up for it. They crossed the street together, Sophie carrying a picture she'd drawn at school, a crayon family that included her, Adrian, Victoria, and a baby labeled Sister. I made this for you, Sophie told Victoria, who immediately started crying again. Pregnancy hormones, Victoria explained, laughing through tears. Everything makes me cry now. But this is beautiful, Sophie. Thank you. You're welcome. Daddy says you and the baby are okay now. We are. We're perfect. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Adrian sat on Victoria's couch with her head in his lap, gently playing with her hair. 2 weeks, she said quietly. Maybe less if she decides to come early. Are you ready? No, but I don't think anyone's ever really ready, are they? Probably not. Adrian, whatever happens, whatever kind of mother I turn out to be this time, thank you for taking a chance on my insane request, for being here through all of this, for loving me even when I'm difficult. You're not difficult. You're human. I'm both. He smiled. Okay, you're both. But I love you anyway. Outside, the Oregon rain started again, softer than the night Victoria had first knocked on his door, but constant. Adrian listened to it and thought about how much had changed in less than a year. How a desperate question on a rainy night had led to this. Him sitting here with the woman he loved, waiting for their daughter to be born, building something neither of them had planned but both of them needed. It wasn't the life he'd imagined, but it was the life he wanted. And in 2 weeks, it would get even more complicated. He couldn't wait. The baby didn't wait 2 weeks. Victoria's water broke at 4 a.m. on a Tuesday, 10 days before her due date. Adrian's phone rang, pulling him from a dream he immediately forgot. It's happening. Victoria's voice was calm, almost eerily so. My water broke about 20 minutes ago. Contractions started 5 minutes apart. Adrian was out of bed before she finished the sentence. I'm calling Rachel to come stay with Sophie. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Adrian? Yeah? I'm really scared. I know, but we've got this. He woke Rachel, who showed up in record time, still in her pajamas. Sophie barely stirred when he kissed her forehead and whispered that he'd be back soon with news about her baby sister. Across the street, Victoria was standing in her living room with a hospital bag, breathing through a contraction. When it passed, she looked up at him with wide eyes. This is really happening. She's coming. She's coming. You ready? No. Let's go anyway. The drive to the hospital was quiet except for Victoria's breathing during contractions. Adrian kept one hand on the wheel and one hand holding hers, trying to project a confidence he absolutely did not feel. His daughter was about to be born. Their daughter. The weight of it was crushing and exhilarating at the same time. At the hospital, things moved fast. Victoria was already 4 centimeters dilated. The nurses got her settled in a room, monitors beeping steadily with the baby's heartbeat. Adrian stood beside her bed, feeling useless and necessary all at once. You don't have to stay, Victoria said between contractions. I know this isn't comfortable. I'm staying, unless you don't want me here. I want you here. I'm just giving you an out if you need it. I don't need an out. Hours passed. The contractions got stronger, closer together. Victoria's mother arrived around noon, took one look at her daughter's face, and immediately started being the kind of helpful that only mothers can be. Ice chips, back rubs, fierce encouragement. You're doing amazing, sweetheart, Jane kept saying. Just like last time, you know how to do this. But Adrian saw the fear in Victoria's eyes every time Jane mentioned last time. The memory of Emma hung in the room like a ghost neither of them acknowledged. By 3 p.m, Victoria was exhausted. 8 hours of labor with no epidural because she wanted to feel everything, to be present for every moment. Adrian had stopped asking if she wanted pain medication after the third sharp refusal. I need to feel this, she'd said through gritted teeth. I need to know it's real. At 7 centimeters, Victoria grabbed Adrian's hand hard enough to hurt. I can't do this. I thought I could, but I can't. What if something goes wrong? What if I lose her too? You're not going to lose her. She's strong. Listen to that heartbeat. She's perfect. You don't know that. You're right. I don't. But I believe it anyway. The doctor came in to check her progress. You're at 9 centimeters. Almost there. Another hour. Maybe less. Victoria started crying. I'm not ready. I thought I'd be ready by now, but I'm not. Jane stroked her daughter's hair. No one's ever ready, baby. You just do it anyway. Adrian leaned close to Victoria's ear. You've survived the unsurvivable. You've built a life from wreckage. You can do this. I know you can. She looked at him with such raw vulnerability it broke his heart. What if I'm a terrible mother this time? What if I can't love her the way I loved Emma? Then you'll love her differently. There's no rule that says love has to look the same twice. At 5 p.m., after 13 hours of labor, the doctor said the words that changed everything. You're fully dilated. It's time to push. What happened next was a blur of controlled chaos. Victoria pushing, the doctor coaching, Jane holding one hand while Adrian held the other. The monitors beeping steadily. Victoria crying and cursing and being stronger than Adrian had ever seen anyone be. I can see the head, the doctor said. One more big push. Victoria bore down with everything she had, her face red, her entire body shaking with effort. And then suddenly there was a cry, not Victoria's, but smaller, newer, furious at being thrust into the world. "It's a girl, too," the doctor announced, though they'd all known that for months. But knowing it and seeing it were different things entirely. The doctor placed the baby on Victoria's chest, and time seemed to stop. Adrian watched Victoria's face transform, terror melting into wonder, grief giving way to something that looked like hope. She touched her daughter's tiny face with shaking fingers. "Hi," Victoria whispered. "Hi, baby girl. I'm your mom." The baby stopped crying at the sound of her voice, eyes blinking open to stare at this new person. Adrian felt his own eyes fill with tears. "She's perfect," he said, his voice breaking. "She really is." Victoria looked up at him. "Do you want to hold her?" Adrian had held Sophie minutes after she was born, but this felt different. This baby was his, but not his. Connected to him, but separate. When the nurse placed her in his arms after cleaning her up, wrapped tight in a hospital blanket, he felt something click into place inside his chest. "Hey there," he said softly. "I'm Adrian. I'm your—" He stopped, not sure what to call himself. Father seemed presumptuous. Friend of your mom seemed insufficient. "You're her dad," Victoria said firmly. "Say it." "I'm your dad, and you're already loved by so many people." The baby yawned, tiny and perfect, and Adrian felt his heart expand in ways he hadn't known were possible. Jane was crying openly, taking pictures, texting everyone she knew. The nurse recorded the baby's stats: 7 pounds, 4 ounces, 20 inches long, perfectly healthy. Born at 5:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in May. "Have you picked a name?" the nurse asked. Victoria and Adrian exchanged glances. They'd spent weeks discussing names, discarding dozens for various reasons. Too close to Emma. Too common. Too unusual. Nothing had felt right. But 3 nights ago, lying on Victoria's couch while she dozed on his shoulder, Adrian had suggested one more. "What about Hazel?" he'd said. "Hazel Grace." Victoria had been quiet for so long he'd thought she'd fallen asleep. Then, "Why Hazel?" "I don't know. It feels right. Strong but gentle. Different from Emma, but still beautiful." Victoria had pulled back to look at him. "Hazel Grace. I love it." Now, in the hospital room with their daughter in his arms, Victoria said, "Her name is Hazel. Hazel Grace Sinclair." "It's perfect," Jane said, still crying. Adrian handed Hazel back to Victoria, watched her settle the baby against her chest, and felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of family. This wasn't the traditional path. There was no wedding before the baby, no shared last name, no neat story to tell at parties. But it was real. It was theirs. The nurse left them alone for a while. Jane stepped out to make phone calls, giving them privacy. Adrian sat on the edge of Victoria's hospital bed, one hand on Hazel's back, the other holding Victoria's hand. "We did it," Victoria said, her voice full of wonder. "We actually did it." "You did it. I just held your hand and tried not to pass out." She laughed weakly. "You were perfect. Thank you for being here." "Nowhere else I'd rather be." They sat in silence for a while, watching Hazel sleep. The baby made small noises, her tiny hands curling and uncurling. Perfect. Completely perfect. "I need to call Sophie," Adrian said eventually. "Let her know her sister is here." Rachel answered on the first ring. "Well?" "It's a girl, Hazel Grace. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Everyone's healthy." "Oh, Adrian, congratulations. How's Victoria?" "Exhausted, but good. Can I talk to Sophie? She's been sitting by the phone for hours." "Hang on." Sophie's excited voice came through. "Daddy, is the baby here?" "She is. Her name is Hazel, and she's beautiful. You want to meet her tomorrow? Can I come now?" "It's late, sweetheart, and Miss Victoria needs rest. Tomorrow morning, I promise." "Okay. Daddy?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad you're happy. You sound really happy." "I am, Soph. I really am." After he hung up, Victoria was watching him with soft eyes. "She's a good kid. The best. She's going to love being a big sister. What if she gets jealous? What if having Hazel changes how she feels about us? Then we deal with it. But I think she's going to surprise us. She's been excited about this for months." Victoria shifted Hazel slightly, wincing. "Everything hurts. They don't tell you how much everything hurts after. Want me to call the nurse? Get you something for the pain? Not yet. I want to be present for this. Fully present. Jane returned with coffee and sandwiches neither Adrian nor Victoria had the appetite for. They made small talk, discussed visiting hours, figured out logistics for the next few days. Around 8 p.m., the nurse suggested Victoria try to feed Hazel. First time can be tricky, the nurse said gently. Don't get discouraged if it takes a few tries. Adrian started to leave, give them privacy, but Victoria stopped him. Stay, please. So he stayed, sitting in the corner trying to be supportive while not staring. Hazel latched after a few attempts, and the relief on Victoria's face was palpable. She's doing it, Victoria whispered, like she couldn't quite believe it. She's actually doing it. Told you. Natural. That night, Adrian slept in the hospital chair again while Victoria and Hazel dozed. Every time Hazel made a noise, Adrian woke up, checking to make sure everything was okay. Around 3 a.m., he found Victoria awake, Hazel sleeping in the bassinet beside her bed. Can't sleep? He asked quietly. I'm afraid if I sleep, she'll disappear, like this is all a dream and I'll wake up alone again. Adrian moved to sit on the edge of her bed. She's real. This is real. You're a mother again, Victoria. That's not going away. I keep thinking about Emma, wondering if she'd be happy about this or if it's somehow a betrayal to move forward. I think she'd want you to be happy. That's what we all want for the people we love. Victoria reached for his hand. I couldn't have done this without you. Not just today, but all of it. You gave me back my life, Adrian. You did the same for me. I was just existing before you knocked on my door, going through motions. You reminded me that life is supposed to be more than safe. We make a good team. Yeah, we do. The next morning, Rachel brought Sophie to the hospital. Adrian met them in the hallway to prepare his daughter for what she was about to see. Miss Victoria is very tired, okay? And babies are small and fragile. You have to be gentle. I know, Daddy. I'm not a baby. He smiled. Right. Sorry. They walked into the room together. Victoria was sitting up in bed, Hazel in her arms, looking exhausted, but radiant. When she saw Sophie, she smiled. Hey, Sophie, want to meet your sister? Sophie approached cautiously, her eyes huge. She's so tiny. She is. Want to sit here beside me? You can hold her if you want. Adrian helped Sophie onto the bed. Then Victoria carefully transferred Hazel into Sophie's arms, supporting her the whole time. Sophie stared down at the baby with pure wonder. Hi, Hazel. I'm your big sister, Sophie. We're going to be best friends. Hazel opened her eyes, seemed to look right at Sophie, and both Adrian and Victoria's hearts melted completely. She likes me, Sophie whispered. Of course she does, Victoria said. You're wonderful. Adrian watched his daughters together, one 7 years old, one less than a day, and felt something settle in his chest. This was his family now. Unconventional, complicated, built from grief and courage and desperate hope. But his. Over the next few days, they established a routine. Adrian spent mornings with Sophie getting her ready for school, then went to the hospital to help Victoria. Rachel brought Sophie to visit in the evenings. Victoria's mother stayed at Victoria's house, preparing for their homecoming and being generally overwhelming in the way loving mothers are. On the third day, the doctor cleared Victoria and Hazel to go home. Adrian drove them, going approximately 5 miles per hour, while Victoria laughed at his excessive caution. She's not made of glass. She's 3 days old. She's basically made of glass. At Victoria's house, Jane had prepared everything. Fresh sheets, meals in the freezer, the nursery pristine and ready. But after helping Victoria get settled, she announced she was heading to a hotel for the night. You two need to figure this out yourselves. I'll be back tomorrow to help, but tonight it's just you and Hazel. After Jane left, Adrian started to head home to give them space, but Victoria stopped him. Stay. I don't want to be alone the first night. You sure? I'm sure. So he stayed. They ordered pizza because cooking seemed impossible. They took turns holding Hazel. They changed diapers and figured out swaddling and panicked when she cried for reasons they couldn't identify. Around midnight, with Hazel finally asleep in her bassinet and both adults exhausted beyond reason, Victoria looked at Adrian. This is insane. Completely. I have no idea what I'm doing. Welcome to parenthood. Nobody does. She laughed, then got serious. I want you to move in. Adrian had been half asleep. Now he was fully awake. What? Move in. You and Sophie. It makes sense. You're here all the time anyway, and this house is too big for just Hazel and me. Sophie can have her own room, you can have space for your business, and we can actually be a family instead of dancing around it. Victoria, that's a huge step. I know, but I'm tired of taking small steps. I love you. You love me. We have a daughter together. Sophie deserves stability, not running back and forth between houses. So I'm asking, will you move in with me? Adrian thought about his house across the street. The small space he'd built into a fortress after Rebecca left. The safe, predictable life he'd created. Then he thought about this house, about the woman he loved exhausted on the couch, about his newborn daughter sleeping peacefully, about Sophie who deserved to see her father take chances. Yeah, he said. Okay, let's do it. Victoria's face lit up despite her exhaustion. Really? Really? But we're doing this right. Family meeting with Sophie. Making sure she's okay with it. Taking time to figure out space and boundaries. No rushing. No rushing, Victoria agreed. But we're doing it. We're doing it. The conversation with Sophie happened 2 days later. Adrian sat her down in their living room and explained that Victoria had invited them to move in with her and Hazel. How do you feel about that? He asked. Sophie thought about it seriously. Would I have my own room? Yes. Would I still go to the same school? Yes. It's only across the street. And we'd all live together? Like a real family? Adrian's throat tightened. Yeah, like a real family. Then I think it's a good idea. I like Miss Victoria, and Hazel needs a big sister around all the time to teach her stuff. You're sure? This is a big change. Sophie looked at him with those two perceptive eyes. Daddy, you've been happy since Miss Victoria had the baby. Like, really happy. I haven't seen you this happy in forever. So yeah, I'm sure. The move happened over the course of 2 weeks. Adrian packed up their lives carefully, separating what to bring from what to donate. Rachel helped, making jokes about him finally upgrading from his bachelor pad. I'm happy for you, she said one afternoon while boxing up kitchen supplies. You deserve this. Feels weird. Good weird, but weird. That's what all the best things feel like. Victoria's house transformed gradually. Sophie's room was decorated with input from both her and Victoria, a collaboration that resulted in purple walls and glow-in-the-dark stars, positioned exactly like the ones in her old room. Adrian set up part of the garage for his repair business. Slowly, their belongings merged until you couldn't tell where one family ended and the other began. The night of the official move-in, they had dinner together, take-out Chinese because no one had energy to cook. Hazel slept in her bouncer while Sophie told Victoria elaborate stories about school. Adrian watched his family and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Contentment. Pure, simple contentment. That night, after Sophie and Hazel were both asleep, Adrian and Victoria stood in the nursery watching their daughter. Can't believe we pulled this off, Victoria whispered. Pulled what off? All of it. The pregnancy, the birth, becoming a family. A year ago, I was alone in this house, convinced I'd never be happy again. Now I'm here with you and 2 beautiful girls, and I keep waiting for something to go wrong. Nothing's going to go wrong. You don't know that. You're right, I don't, but I believe it anyway. Victoria leaned against him, and he wrapped his arms around her. They stood like that for a long time, watching Hazel breathe, marveling at this tiny person they'd created from impossible circumstances. 3 months passed in a blur of sleepless nights and coffee and slowly figuring out how to be a family. Hazel grew, started smiling, became fascinated by Sophie, who adored her completely. Adrian's business actually improved. Turned out people liked supporting the guy who'd taken in a billionaire's baby. Victoria slowly returned to her work, though she was more selective now about what projects deserved her energy. They fought sometimes, about silly things like whose turn it was to do dishes, and serious things like how to handle Sophie's occasional jealousy of the baby. But they always came back to each other, always talked it through, always chose to stay. On a rainy Saturday in October, almost exactly 1 year after Victoria had knocked on Adrian's door, they were all in the living room. Sophie was teaching Hazel how to stack blocks, even though Hazel was months away from actually being able to stack anything. Victoria was working on her laptop while simultaneously rocking Hazel's bouncer with her foot. Adrian was fixing a blender that belonged to their neighbor. It was beautifully, perfectly ordinary. I have a question, Sophie announced suddenly. What's up, sweetheart? Adrian asked without looking up from the blender. When are you and Miss Victoria getting married? Adrian's screwdriver slipped, nearly stabbing him. Victoria looked up from her laptop. That's a big question, Victoria said carefully. Why do you ask? Because my friend Emma, the one in my class, not the other Emma, her parents just got married and she was a flower girl and it looked really fun. And you guys live together and have a baby, so I thought maybe you'd get married too. Adrian and Victoria exchanged glances. They hadn't talked about marriage, hadn't even brought it up. They were still figuring out how to be together without adding more complications. Would you want us to get married? Adrian asked. Sophie shrugged. I don't know. I just wondered. And if you did, I'd want to be a flower girl, that's all. After Sophie wandered off to play with Hazel again, Victoria said quietly, That was interesting. Yeah. Have you thought about it? Marriage? Adrian set down the blender. Have you? Maybe. Sometimes. Late at night when I can't sleep and I'm watching you with the girls and thinking about how lucky I am. She paused. But I don't need a wedding to know we're committed. I already know that. Me too, but... He stopped, trying to find the right words. I want Sophie to see that sometimes people choose to stay, that love doesn't always end in abandonment. And I want Hazel to grow up knowing her parents chose each other intentionally, not just because circumstances threw us together. Victoria closed her laptop. Are you proposing? I don't know, maybe? This is possibly the least romantic proposal in history if I am. She laughed. It's very us, though. Accidental and awkward and perfect. So is that a yes? I don't know. Are you actually asking? Adrian looked at this woman who'd knocked on his door desperate and broken, who'd trusted him with the most vulnerable parts of herself, who'd given him back a life worth living. He thought about the past year, about everything they'd survived and built together. Victoria Sinclair, will you marry me? Not because we have to, not because of Hazel or Sophie or anyone else's expectations, but because I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life figuring out how to be your partner. She was crying again, but smiling too. That's better. And yes, obviously yes. They kissed while Sophie cheered in the background and Hazel made happy baby noises and the rain fell outside, softer than that first night but still constant. The wedding happened 3 months later on Victoria's porch. Small and intimate, just close family and a few friends. Sophie was the flower girl, wearing a purple dress that matched the walls of her room. Victoria's mother held Hazel, who slept through the entire ceremony. Rachel cried. Jane cried. Even the officiant got a little misty. Adrian's vows were simple. You taught me that the best things in life come from the scariest choices. Thank you for being brave enough to knock on my door. Thank you for trusting me with your heart. I promise to show up for you every day, in the big moments and the small ones. I promise to love both our daughters fiercely, and I promise to never stop choosing you. Victoria's vows were longer, more emotional. She talked about surviving loss and finding hope, and learning that love doesn't replace what's gone, but makes space for something new. She thanked Adrian for seeing her grief and not running, for believing she could be a mother again when she'd stopped believing in herself. You gave me back my future, she said through tears. I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for that rainy night when I ran out of places to hide. I love you, Adrian Hayes. I love the family we've built, and I can't wait to see what comes next. When they kissed, everyone applauded. Sophie threw flower petals. Hazel woke up and cried, because that's what babies do. It was messy and imperfect and absolutely beautiful. That night, after everyone had left and the girls were both asleep, Adrian and Victoria sat on their porch, the same porch where she'd first asked her impossible question. You know what's funny? Victoria said. What? A year ago, I thought the only way to survive was to recreate what I'd lost, to have another daughter, another family, another chance at the life that got taken from me. But this isn't that at all. This is completely different. Is that good or bad? It's perfect. Because it's not a replacement. It's something new. Something we built together from nothing but hope and stubbornness and really terrible timing. Adrian pulled her close. I think terrible timing might be our specialty. Along with making impossibly complicated decisions work out somehow, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the neighborhood settle into night. Across the street, Adrian's old house was dark. They'd sold it last month to a young couple with a baby. Starting over, just like he had. "Do you ever regret it?" Victoria asked quietly. "Saying yes that night?" "Not for a second." "You?" "Never. Even when it was hard. Even when we fought, or I was terrified, or nothing made sense. I've never regretted choosing hope over safety." "That's what you did, you know. That night you knocked on my door. You chose hope." "We both did." Inside, they could hear Hazel starting to fuss. Victoria started to get up, but Adrian stopped her. "I've got her. You rest." He went inside and picked up his daughter, his 6-month-old daughter, who had his eyes and Victoria's chin and a personality that was entirely her own. She stopped crying immediately, staring up at him with that serious baby expression. "Hey there, troublemaker. Can't sleep?" Sophie appeared in the hallway, rubbing her eyes. "Is Hazel okay?" "She's fine, just wanted some attention. You should be asleep." "I know. I just wanted to say I'm glad you married Miss Victoria. Now she's Mom, right? Can I call her Mom?" "If she's okay with it, sure. Ask her tomorrow." "Okay. Good night, Daddy." "Good night, Hazel." "Good night, sweetheart." Adrian stood in the nursery with Hazel, listening to Sophie pad back to bed, to Victoria moving around downstairs, to the rain starting up again outside. This was his life now. This beautiful, complicated, unconventional life built from a desperate question and an impossible choice. He thought about the fortress he'd built 4 years ago after Rebecca left. How he'd made his world small and safe to protect Sophie and himself from more hurt. How he'd convinced himself that routine and predictability were enough. Victoria had shattered that fortress. Not violently, but persistently, the way rain eventually breaks down even the strongest walls. She'd shown him that safety wasn't the same as living. That risk was sometimes worth it. That the best families aren't the ones that look perfect from the outside, but the ones that choose each other every single day despite the mess. Hazel yawned, her tiny hands gripping his shirt. She was falling back asleep, content now that someone was holding her. "You know what, kid?" Adrian whispered. "You're going to hear this story someday. About how your mom knocked on a stranger's door in the rain and asked him something impossible. About how that stranger was me, and I was terrified, but I said yes anyway. And you're going to think we're both crazy. You're probably right, but here's what I hope you understand. The biggest blessings don't come easy. They come messy and complicated and scary. They come disguised as risks you probably shouldn't take. And if you're lucky, if you're really, really lucky, you're brave enough to take them anyway." He laid Hazel back in her crib, watching her settle into sleep. Then he went downstairs to find his wife, to sit with her on the porch and listen to the rain, to be grateful for a knock in the night that had changed everything. Because sometimes the best families are the ones you build from nothing but hope and courage and one impossible question. And sometimes, just sometimes, impossible questions have beautiful answers. Outside, the rain fell steady and soft, washing the world clean for another day.